All right, let's kick off the road to the four-belt undisputed champion in the heavyweight division story, part one, as I would say, the IBF. In history, guys, all I can say is the history of the four-belt era has never been a factor for anyone in life when it comes to it from each weight class around the world. There's always going to be a crazy moment when you say to yourself, there might be a five-belt era. But at the same time, guys, this is history among the makings, guys. And today, guys, this is part one, the IBF. Now, guys, the stories I'm going to talk about in this might take a long time, maybe an hour or so. This is part one out of part four. And the story is, guys, for each part, I'm going to talk about each title, each belt from the alphabetical title. I'm not going to talk about the lineage and the Ring magazine and those other championship belts. So mostly because they are world heavyweight titles, but they're hard to look up because the internet doesn't pay attention to those belts. But at the same time, even BoxRec doesn't pay attention to them, which I wish they do. I wish they will, and I hope in the future we will get that. But when you look at this, ladies and gentlemen, the history is this, guys. What I'm going to do for each part, I'm going to talk about each belt and its history after Lennox Lewis won the belt back in November 13th, 1999, and before Alexander Usyk won the belt in 2024. So the story goes, guys, I'm going to talk about the history of each title, of how it got to the road from the three-belt era to the four-belt era, of how Lennox Lewis was the only champion and the last champion of the heavyweight to be undisputed, to Usyk now being the new undisputed championship. I'll be talking about the history of each belt, each match, but keep this in mind, guys, I might do some repeats. I might talk about some repeats in each matches on other podcasts by accident, so I will apologize. You'll understand what I'm talking about when each episode will be released. All I can say, guys, is pardon me if I actually make mistakes, but at the end of the day, when you're making a long-hour podcast, sometimes it is what it is. So with that being said, let's break it down, shall we? So the history, guys, is that the IBF is actually 41 years old. So the IBF is 41 years old. It's not the oldest of all time. It became founded back in 1983, but Larry Holmes never won that belt until November of 1984. So it took over a year until they took that belt on the line. But the history does start out to be more controversial in the 90s, but we'll get to that in just a couple minutes. So the story goes like this. Lennox Lewis would defeat Evander Holyfield in Las Vegas, Nevada in their rematch. He would win. And surprisingly, guys, he would not be undisputed for long. But, of course, we will get to that in another episode. Instead, he would actually choose his own replacement because of his undisputed going down the tube. On April the 29th, 2000, he would only hold on to the IBF belt and the WBC Heavyweight Championship while taking on against Michael Grant. Now, Michael Grant, 31-0, he was a young buck in his days. He started out strong. And for reasons of how he got flopped so hard, this was the biggest squash match in an undefeated fighter. This was like Lewis defeating a hype job. He knocks him down 3 times in the opening round, comes back in round 2, and finishes him off. It's just dangerous. And this took place in Madison Square Garden. And also, this was his 7th title defense for the WBC, which in hindsight, because he is trying to go for 10 at this point, like, Lewis was already demolishing competition. And to be honest, it just goes to show you, by the year of 2000, he defeated Francis Botha, and him being the greatest boxer to never win a heavyweight champion, which he should have deserved it, he got his butt knocked out by TKO in the second round as well in London, England on July the 15th that same year. But I will say, though, the fight betwixt Lewis and David Tua in November the 11th that same year, his 9th title defense, seeing how that went 12 rounds by decision and how it all accumulated, because you also have to look at it for a perspective that David Tua was a really dangerous fighter. He people called him the next boxer from New Zealand to be heavyweight champion. But of course, we would never get that until 16 years later in the future in 2016. And of course, I'm sure we already know that history if you haven't. But but at this moment, guys, by 2000, most of Lennox Lewis was on the line because there was information that he was trying to fight Mike Tyson. Some rumors did say he was going to retire after he defeated Mike Tyson. So there's more attention to him at the time. But of course, guys, here's the information I would like to talk about. April the 22nd, 2001 in South Africa, Hasim Rotman pulls out an unbelievable victory. And even though Hasim had troubles in the first round, because Hasim Rotman started out strong in the first round, and then out of nowhere, Lewis proved himself. Like, Lewis came back a little bit stronger in the second and third round of the fight, and it seemed like he was doing a pretty good job. And when you look at it for that perspective, he was starting out pretty good. But surprisingly, in round 4, when Hasim Rotman came back and kind of hurt his opponent a little bit, it was pretty crazy. Also, keep this in mind, guys. This was also promoted on USA HBO by promoter Cedric Kushner. Now, the history goes as this. Kushner was already trying to be in the blink of an eye. He did fight for the IBF belt with Axel Schultz at the time back in 95 by that controversial majority decision by George Foreman, and he got that belt stripped away from him, which means Foreman never had any more belts except the lineal belt, the lineal heavyweight champion for the next couple years in his life in 96, 97. And it was so controversial that Axel Schultz lost. And to let you viewers know, Cedric Kushner was promoted by him at that time. But guys, here's something crazy. Around the time in 2001, there was a documentary that some people might not know. And I will give you viewers links and information. So if you viewers want to watch it or not, it's a pretty good documentary. The documentary is called the FBI Sting on Pro Boxing. Boxing in and out of the ring full documentary. If you see the thumbnail, that's 1 hour and 30 minutes and 10 seconds with Don King just posing to the camera crew. That's the documentary. It's by I Love Docs. I'll put the links in the description. The information stated that back in 1996 and so, mostly the ratings chairman, Doug Beavers, at the time was actually trying to be part of the ratings chairman. He liked training his fighters. He liked doing this. And he was at the time trying to promote on fighters. But there were actually other promoters at the time that were trying to put in money of their own. In 1996, there was information, despite of achieving of legitimacy during the IBF at the time, we already know about the information about the money and such, that at the time back in 99, we heard information that FBI surveillance heard that there were actually bribes taken in the IBF at the time. And there were also security footage of the information in that documentary that talks about the IBF ratings scammed at the time, with Don King, also known as Fuzzy Wuzzy, and the Fat Man, Cedric Kushner, and Bob Arum were actually paying the IBF to bribe the IBF, not by win-fall victories. It's not like the information of Rick Elvis Parker and the Mark Gastineau of how they paid their fighters to take a dive. That wasn't like that. It wasn't the win-loss record. It was promoting their fighters to be in the top 15 ranks so they can bribe their fighters to be on the top ranks. The IBF at the time and so on was really out of control at the time. And so at the time, you think to yourself, does this have anything to do with Hasim Rotman or anything else? There was information at the time that one of the light heavyweight boxers of William Guthrie did have a problem back in the 90s when he was working with Don King at the time, and Don King wasn't giving his fights. He didn't have a title shot. He was giving him nobody opponents by Don King promoter fighters. And at the time, this was some pretty tough information. It was pretty crazy. And I don't want to talk about Don King as much in this information, like whenever, for some reason. But yeah, the information was pretty out of nowhere. There was a lot of bribery scandals during the end of the 20th century. There was management during the time in 2004 when we heard about another guy that goes by the name of I forgot his name. I forgot. Robert Lee Jr., I think, or maybe someone else. I heard there was information in 2004 that there was a conviction through when they had former Michigan Boxing Commission of Vice President and Boxing Safety of the IBF interim president, Hiawatha Knight. He passed away in 2014, pretty much. He became president following Lee's conviction. I forgot who Lee it was. I only know the guy's name Lee. I forgot his other full name, but yeah, it has to be Robert Lee Jr. I think so. There was information that at the time in 2001 where Lee's conviction and was the first woman president of any world governing boxing organization was in 2001, where Maryam Muhammad assumed the presidency, followed by a guy named Daryl J. Peoples, who remained president as of 2018. And the management was pretty on point. So there was a lot of other information from here or there, but there was a lot of convictions in 2000 when there was extortions for promotion of Bob Arum at the time, because Bob Arum testified that he had paid the president, Bobby Lee, at the time for $100,000 in 2 installments in 95 as the first half of a $200,000 bribe of the middleman of Stanley Hoffman, adding that Lee had first demanded $500,000 to approve the Axel Schultz and Foreman fight that took place, as I just said before about minutes ago. So the settlement of everything else, yeah, it was crazy. But the documentary does also show Cedric Kushner was trying to keep his fighter Hasim Rotman because he knew that the odds of Don King taking his fighter away was going to be possible. And of course, the final minutes of the documentary stated that Hasim Rotman went with Don King because Cedric wasn't giving him a good payday. So Don King took his fighter away and gave him a contract, and that was it. What happened? Well, on November the 17th, live in Las Vegas, Nevada, in the Mandalay Bay Resort, Lewis won back his title in round 4 KO. The rest of Cedric Kushner, he felt bad because one of his best friends at the time left his office and told him that he was going to pick up Rotman and tell him this or that, but all of that was a lie. And even though you viewers think that the documentary was BS, but the information and some of the stuff, you can tell. Like, the IBF at the time did have some crazy stuff going on. And they were also talking about those other moments, like like Mike Tyson wanted to have a shot at the time, but he had to take on this overweighted tomato can of Brian Nielsen in 2001. But they would have their fight in June 8th, 2002, which Lewis would defeat Mike Tyson, which I will talk about that fight in the WBC part, but I'm not going to talk about it now because it's too much information yet. So, yeah, mostly Lewis would win back his title, defended it, and then he would strip the IBF because he didn't want to take on his opponent like he did to the WBA belt in 99. So I think it was possible. Yeah. Of course, he would retire in 2003, ending his last fight with a bang, barely. But in December the 14th, 2002, this is what we get. Evander Holyfield takes on Chris Bird for the heavyweight title. And this fight was pretty amazing. But considering the fight and how close it was to disparity, it was a pretty decent fight for both fighters. But at the end of the day, when you look at the fight and you look at the stats, there wasn't a lot to be talked about. Because, like, guys, Chris Bird outstruck Holyfield in that fight in each round and landed 2 times as many shots as Holyfield did in round 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. He's like maybe won like 7 rounds. I gave him 8 rounds, to be honest, because I gave him the 12th round at the end. So it was actually like 116 to 112 for Bird. Evander Holyfield still proved himself, but of course, we wouldn't give him another title shot for a long time. But yeah, like defeating a good legend like that was pretty good. Chris Bird was already trying to recover for his controversial win with him and Vitaly Klitschko, and then he got his butt beat a year later with Vitaly's brother Vlad and how they both won out their belt. But that's a story for another time. But yet again, I think the most other particular information has to take place in September the 20th, 2003, when Bird defeated Freza Kendo. Now, Freza Kendo is another guy that I will talk about because his career is pretty dumb. This guy had a multi-time decade of getting title shots and controversies. And I will say, though, guys, the fight was just... It wasn't boring, but somewhat not interesting because, Bird, throwing out every single punch he did. He's a 37-2 fighter, and he was leading Kendo across the ring. And in that fight, he was dominating. Kendo's counter punches, he did dominate in the middle rounds and appeared to take Bird off his game plan a lot more than how Holyfield was doing to Bird in the fight. And even though after the fight, Bird did give credit to Kendo, because even though he did say he never got hurt, and even though he did say there was a couple times that it reminded of himself that he had to hold his hands up high and other stuff, and there were times that there was moments that Kendo would have won the fight because he was stunned as the crowd, because the fight would end in controversial fashion. Because if people think that Freza Kendo deserved to be champion, sure, then I understand. Because the scorecards, in my opinion, were pretty decently on point for Freza Kendo. He went on to him in round 2, 3, 4, and 5 were huge. 7, 8, 9. And there were some close rounds once in a while in round 10, 11, 12, and Bird might have had some stuff in those later rounds. I did give out round 11 and so to Kendo, so I had it 116 to 112 for Kendo at the time when I noticed that fight, but the judges had it otherwise. One guy named Steve had it 116 to 112 like me, but he gave it to Bird. John Lawson had it 117 to 111, Bird. Don Ackerman, 115 to 113 for Bird. Bird won by unanimous decision. And if you viewers think that I'm being too hard on Bird, the next fight would get worse, as he would take on the return of Andrew Gallardo. After his controversial fight with him and Tyson in 2000, no contest, he would come back, win a couple fights, and at this time, he was already trying to come back as strong as ever. And surprisingly, he did. Andrew Gallardo and the Polish boxing world is just shocked because he had Bird in round 1, which was one of the best rounds for Gallardo, in my opinion, in the entire fight. He had him in round 3. He had him in round 4. He had him in round 5. He had him in round 6. He kind of had him in round 8. Round 12. The fight went on for me that the final score was 115 to 113, Gelato. And even though Steve Weisfeld had the same thing I did, Tony, another guy, had it 115, 113 for Bird. But guess what? Another random judge I never heard before named Melvina had it 114 even by split decision draw. At this moment, this is ridiculous. How is Chris Bird still holding on to this title? And it gets crazy because, again, from April the 17th to November the 13th of 2004, during that fight with Gelato in April, he would take on some nobody dude that had 3 losses and 3 draws named JayMetal McCline, if I said his name wrong. And that guy knocked out Bird in the second round. And Bird would recover from that fight. And it's so crazy. And guys, I'm sorry for going by these matches too quickly, but these matches are too long. But it was so crazy. I was like, dude, this guy named Jamil had no chance of being a heavyweight contender. And he's putting a good show. He hurts him in round 1, 2, 3. He got him in round 5, and I did gave him round 4, but of course, Bird did come back strong around the time in round 6, round 7, round 8, and round 9, and round 11 was a huge good win for him there in round 12. So he did finish off the rounds at the end. But in round 10 was a really, really confusingly close round. And surprisingly, I gave that round to JayMetal, scoring it 114 to 113. One judge named Gled Feldman had it 114 to 112. 114 to 113, Luis Rivera had it for Bird. And Don Trella, 115 to 112 for Bird. This guy is so damn lucky. 3 friggin' title defenses. It's like, this is such a controversial dude. I just don't understand why he's still holding on to the title. He would even hold on to it all the way to the year all the way from 2005. He would not even defend it once until October the 1st, 2005 against Darvell Williamson. And he's trying to recover in his last 6 fights with a couple of losses in his career at the point. And Williamson did exceptionally fine. That was a pretty hard round for me to judge, but because there was times that each fight was hard for me to choose on who was going to win the fight. I had it probably 7 rounds to... I just don't know. Bird kind of won the fight, and the judges all favored it. 2 of them favored it 116 to 112, and the other had it 115 to 113. And I kind of agreed with that and just give Bird the win, because at this moment, it's ridiculous. Until April the 22nd, 2006, American boxing in the heavyweight was going to come to an end. When Vladimir Klitschko, out of nowhere, Chris Bird went to Klitschko's backyard in Sapp Arena in Mannheim, and he got his ass pummeled. Also, the IBO belt was in vacant at the time, so that belt was for the title that night. Still, it's not major, but it's been around forever for this Undisputed, so God knows why it still has to be in the Undisputed. And Klitschko obliterated him. There was a time that Chris Bird and Vladimir both had the fight even in round 1, but come round 2, come to round 3, round 4, it was all Klitschko. He even got him in round 5, which I'm sure we already know was a 10-8 round I gave to him, so it was a knockout, or you can say penalty, point abduction, God knows. he got abducted the point for, And by round 6, it was already done for, guys. Like Chris Bird, I feel like his career was done for, because this was the fight that would end his career for good. As of round 6, Vladimir didn't give him a breath in round 7. The fight ended in 41 seconds of that round, and that was it. And for the rest of the story for Bird, he would actually fight in 2007 against some random dude. He would lose against Alexander Poviekin that same year in October for the IBF heavyweight title eliminator, which was part of the tournament for the Bird versus Poviekin and the Brock versus Eddie Chambers fight. And, of course, by 2008, he lost against a nobody, which he shouldn't have. Takes on a nobody a year later in 2009, and that's the end of Bird's career. Bird's a two-time heavyweight champion, but to be honest, does he even deserve those wins? At this moment, Klitschko, he was already trained by the most dangerous person that ever brought someone back from the dead. Vladimir recovered from 3 losses in his career, and one guy helped him get there. Like, am I supposed to say who his name is? Should I or should I not? Emanuel Stewart. He trained Vladimir all the way from 2004 to 2012. This guy helped Vlad get to where he needed to go. And he helped him try to recover from his career at the time after he lost against Corey Sanders. And after he lost against Lamont Brewster, people thought he was a dead man. But after, and even though he was already suffering from that title fight and such in his years and this or that, Emanuel was trying to train him as hard as he could. He barely recovered from a loss against Samuel Peters in 2005 when he knocked him down when Samuel knocked him down 3 times for the title eliminator that brought him to this match with Chris Bird. Samuel Peters won 0 rounds that involved no knockouts. He knocked him out 3 times in each of 3 different rounds, but the scores were all 114 to 111 because the other 9 rounds were all Klitschko. It's just ridiculous of how Klitschko won that fight. Of course, the rest of the history was this. By November the 11th, 2006, Vladimir would defend his first belt of the IBF, dominating a guy named Calvin Brock. He would take on Ray Austin come March the 10th, and he got him in round 2, better than Calvin Brock in round 7. He would take on somewhat of a former prime fighter of Lamont Brewster in July the 7th, 2007, which was the same, which he got him after the end of 6 rounds by cornerman retirement, which was the same night when Clint Boyer finished 7th place in the Daytona Firecracker that same night, when he finished 7th in 7th place when he was carrying the car windows number 7 in 2007 on the 7th month of the 7th day. That's pretty awesome to think of. But Lamont Brewster just couldn't capitalize on that, and he got his butt beat by Vlad. It was a dominant fight. Every round was won by Vlad. But by 2008, he would go back to Madison Square Garden after his Calvin Brock win, that same arena, and he went 12 rounds to decision by Sultan Imragimov. Of course, at the time, he would go back to Germany, and he would stay in Germany forever. He would not go back to the U.S. until 2015. And his win against Tony Thompson, after having a huge 10-round battle, considering he was winning most of the rounds, and he got him in round 11 by a huge good TKO win, or a KO. He won against a fight against Hasim Rotman when he was past his prime. And, and by the way, the fight with him and Sultan Imragimov was also for the WBO belt. But, so yeah. And of course, some of the information, yeah, it is what it is. But I will say, though, each of these fights did have their own rights because of it. But you can say that Vladimir's boxing style was boring, but you can't say that it was that bad. But I think in 2009, after his win against Ruslan Chagayev, which we will talk about him in another video because I have more information to talk about him, so I'm not going to talk about this fight. But all I can say is, like, his WBA title was not on the line at the time because it was stripped, so that's all you have to know about Ruslan. But then in March the 20th, he would take on Eddie Chambers. And Eddie Chambers, this fight was more talked about. This is one fight I want to talk about. So Eddie Chambers was the IBF at number 3, but the WBO, he was originally at number 1. This fight was crazy. Klitschko was a really tall fighter at the time, and he was an improvement at the time. Emmanuel Stewart was a little bit tired of Vlad's because he was about Vladimir, because there were times that he was slightly off in some cases, because rumors did state here that Klitschko said before the fight that he was in the best shape of his life, but his timing seemed slightly off in his bout, nearly 10 months. And there were moments, and Stewart did found some problems, like in round 6 or so of round 6, like when you have to give credit, he was fast, very fast, Klitschko said, and he doesn't have much punching power, and his game plan was gone by round 6 because each round was pretty obvious. Like after the end of round 11, Emmanuel Stewart went to the corner and he told him that he's just going to keep running all day. He better knock him out. He doesn't want to go for another decision. He doesn't want this fight to end in 12 rounds. Go knockout mode. And when you listen to the corner ring at the time, yeah, it was pretty obvious that like this was a pretty interesting, boring fight because it kind of seemed boring. Like it was pretty like, don't get me wrong, there was some punching power and pain, but it was just too boring because you have Chambers, because the only thing you see is that Klitschko was tired to deliver, was actually really tired because he was clearly trying to deliver a knockout punch in the final round after he was chasing Chambers, as Chambers was always doing in every single round after round. He wasn't even winning any of the rounds at the time. And when he caught the American with a looping left to the side of his head that put him down, and Chambers was already laying on the first bottom rope with his body and his whole, it was crazy. You think to yourself the fight would have counted at the 3-minute mark, but referee just stopped the fight, and at 2 minutes and 55 seconds of the final round by KO, Klitschko won. It was pretty surprising, and this was his 8th title defense. His 9th title defense comes September the 11th, 2010, the 9th anniversary of 9/11. His win against Samuel Peter was nothing much to talk about because Peter was already having a problem with his back-to-back losses, and he had to recover, winning a few fights here or there around some years, and there was nothing much to talk about that. Like he was lasting in the fight, but Klitschko got him hard in round 10 and won by KO. I think when you look at that perspective, it was pretty tough. And even though Peter was rated number 2 in the IBF at the point, he was rated in the other rankings at the time, but not as high as the IBF. But yeah, but guys, seeing that big uppercut from Klitschko late in the 6th, that did shook Peter at the time. And even though the bell did rescue him, saved, because he was saved by the bell, but still, when you see Peter, like when you see Klitschko hitting Peter at the will from in 7th round and again in the 8th round, landing huge combinations against this Nigerians, hitting him in the head a lot, and Peter was really short at the time. Like he tried to come inside, but ended up mostly clinging onto Klitschko. Like they were pushing each other around in the ring in the 9th round. It's like, again, it's like no one could find the strategy of stopping this dude because he was trained by the most dangerous trainer of all time, Emmanuel Stewart. like, that's how good Emmanuel Stewart was. He was training out Klitschko pretty good in each fight. I think the most great moment is when he took on David Haye on July the 2nd, 2011. But of course, because that was actually for the unified belt, he would fight for the WBA belt at that point. So I will talk about that fight in the WBA. So let's skip that one. But yeah, after that win with him and Haye, him and his brother Vidui was also holding on to the WBC belt at the time, which made both the Klitschko brothers holding on to both all champions. And at this point, back around 2012, is when people were trying to see if they were going to put a fight against these guys. But considering that both their mother and any of their families promised that they would never fight each other, was pretty tough. It stanked, but it is what it is. You don't want a brother versus brother hurting each other. People did say Vidui was a dangerous good fighter, better than Klitschko. And pretty much, yeah. Like, when you watch the information of Rummy's Corner and his video of him talking about the Klitschkos, yeah, you can tell that Vidui was a better fighter than Vlad. And to be honest, that's the truth. Like, hell, like, yes, by 2012, both the Klitschkos had fought more than over 3 times. And in March 3rd, Klitschko defeated Jean-Marc Mormek in round 4 by a huge KO win. He defeated Tony Thompson in July the 7th got him in 6 rounds by TKO. He defeated Polish fighter undefeated 27-0 Mariusz Lasz in November the 10th that same year, dominating all 12 rounds. And of course, the guy recovered it through, but unfortunately by 2013, after Klitschko defeated Francisco Pianeta by 6 rounds TKO, there was a time in October when he was going to take on Poviekin, when he was former regular something, which I might... Vidui Klitschko would retire for good. He would never get to 10 title defenses. And at this moment, Klitschko was over 10 title defenses a long time ago. Because after his David Haye win, which was his 10th title defense, and after his 14th title defense against Francisco, his 15th title defense was against Alexander. And Poviekin, I just don't know. Like, Poviekin just had nothing. Like, he was down in round 2, late in that second round. He got knocked down in round 7. And he got knocked down in round 7. Like, in the first 30 seconds and almost in the halfway mark of round 7, he got knocked out again. And at the 2-minute mark with maybe a minute or even 50 seconds left of the fight, he got knocked out again. Like, Poviekin... And also, I think Klitschko got deducted a point in the 11th round. Interesting. But he finished the fight off, won every round. It's just... Like, what else can I say about Klitschko? People do say that Klitschko was a boring fighter, but it's up to you viewers to decide that. Like, heck, his win against Alex Lepay, or like his fight in April 26, 2014, was a pretty obvious fight. Like, yes, he knocked him down once in round 1, and there were times when you thought that the fight was going to go longer, but no, it lasted quicker than expected. Like, he knocked down Alex twice in round 5, but the referee just didn't want him to continue. He wasn't winning any of the rounds. But there is one fighter from the country of Bulgaria, considering he's still boxing to this day. Kubrat Pulev in November the 15th, 2014 is 20-0, and he's trying to prove himself he's the best. He proved himself. He won fights against interesting contenders in his time, and he's still doing it to this day, whether it was good fights or bad fights. But every time he's in a unified fight or a heavyweight title fight, he gets dominated, and this fight is nothing less than horrific. Vladimir, he got him hard in the first round, and I scored a 10-7 in that fight. Yeah, it was bad. Like, Klitschko got him in round 2 by a 10-9. He got him again. He knocked him out again in round 3, a 10-8. Round 4 was somewhat better for Pulev. He tried. He did do some punches once in a while, but at the end of the day, Klitschko was doing the better work than he did. And then come round 5, that huge, like, that horrific punch that has to be one of the most brutalest knockout wins in the history. Like, watching that replay and seeing Kubrat fall to the ground that hard in the 5th round, it was devastating. It was devastating. Now, guys, guys, there's nothing I could say about April the 25th, 2015, other than 3 months ago, we already know we had a new American, the next American to become heavyweight champion in January that same year in 2015. 3 months later, we have another one that might pull out a victory as well. 19-0, Brian Jenkins. Jennings? Like, Brian Jennings, to be honest, nothing. He flopped it. All he was doing was running around and trying to protect himself from the fight. This did took place in Madison Square Garden, so it's great that Vlad came back to America. But yeah, there's nothing I can say about this fight. All I can say is Bryant was trying to survive in that fight, but depending on what you say, it is what it is. And then we already know Tyson Fury came out and friggin' crushed him. I have talked about this fight before online and other stuff, so I don't think talking about it again will be that necessary. All we can say is Tyson Fury at this time, this was the best prime Tyson Fury we've ever saw in our life, and that's all I can say. He won the fight fair and square, and that was it. Like, Klitschko did come back in the final few rounds of the fight and finish off strongly, but it just wasn't enough, and that was it. But then, guys, after Tyson Fury won the belt, technically he would actually strip the IBF because he did not want to take on mandatory challenger Charles Martin, because they were scheduled to put a rematch betwixt him and Vladimir. They wanted to do Vladimir versus Tyson 2 fight in June of 2016. And because they were trying to have a mandatory fight for the IBF, and originally it wasn't Charles Martin. It was actually another fighter. I think it was Glasky, or I think it was Glaskov, because I think he was number 1 and Charles Martin was number 2. All we can say is they were both in the top ranks at the time, and the IBF was stripped because they wanted to order a rematch with Fury and Vladimir. Can you blame them? Yeah. So the bout took place in December. The 27th is when it was officially updated. A month later, this took place during the famous fight with the Polish versus the Bronze Bomber. And I think we already know how that came down. But this fight here was, I just felt bad. This fight, guys, I have some interesting, good information to talk about this fight. Oh, it's been a while since I talked about a singles fight for the singles title. So 2 undefeated fighters. They both have 1 draw in their career. Charles Martin's a tall guy. He has a good reach advantage, but people do know that Glasgow is a pretty good punch. He does have that good angle once in a while. He does prove himself to be in the inside of it. Like, come the first round, guys. The first round, he came on. Both fighters were evening up each other, and there was times that Glasgow landed some interesting punches. There's times that he was cornering in the fight once in a while, and he was hurting out his opponent pretty decently. But Charles Martin was still landing punches of his own. I kind of had it for Glazkov. Come round 2, it was full Glazkov. Like, he got Charles Martin 1 point. When you look at this fight, you can tell yourself that Martin had no chance of being a champion, but sometimes luck can be in your favor, and this is what the fight went. And it was here. Because, guys, you have to understand, not much happened in the first 2 rounds because both guys were studying each other, but it didn't mean that they were landing some punches once in a while. It seemed like that Charles Martin wasn't going for a knockout win. It seemed like Glazkov wasn't. He was trying to win rounds once in a while. There are times they're throwing interesting punches once in a while. But then in the 3rd round, around 1 minute or so, or even so on, Glazkov was going for a by punch. He angled his foot so much far. He punches, and then he gets backed up, and then he falls to the ground. Whatever happened, something was up. And then with only 1 minute and 30 seconds halfway into the 3rd round, he angles his body again. Martin kind of didn't land a punch on him because Martin tried to go for another body puncher once in a while. And before you know it, he was down again. And then the referee, bless you, it seemed like the referee didn't know what to do. So when he got back up, he just gave him a standing 8 count for some reason. And Glazkov goes to the corner ring. He's limping. Referee tells him to continue, but I think he already knew that something was up. So the referee waved the fight, and Charles Martin was the winner. We later realized that it was later that Glazkov was diagnosed with a completely torn ACL, a dislocated knee, a torn media, meniscus, and sprains of his MCL and LCL. As a result, for complicated nature of the injury combined with disputes with the promoter, or with Glazkov's promoter, he hasn't returned to the ring to fight since. And to be honest, boxing just lost a another future Ukraine champion in the history. And as for Charles Martin, he went up against a guy that was more dangerous than he was. And AJ obliterated him in the 1st round. Well, he got him hard in the first, but he threw crazy rights to him. He threw a crazy right to the head in the 2nd round, and that was it for Martin. There were times it was a pretty dangerous fight. That was just one of the most squash matches in history. Also, Charles Martin only started in his pro year only a few years. And as for AJ, he started a few years as well. So seeing these 3 guys only start 3 or 4 years into their boxing career and now they're heavyweight champions, that's crazy. They're in the top 10 for the greatest boxer to ever win a fight, depending on how long his first debut fight was. That's pretty crazy. Come June the 25th, he would knock out Dominic Breazeale, and that fight goes to show you that Dominic Breazeale was not going to be in a good heavyweight contender. But there was going to be more to that in the future, so I'm going to save him for another time. He'll take on Eric Molina in December the 10th that same year, go 3 rounds with him, and Molina went down from a chopping right against Joshua, and it was devastating. But the fight in April the 29th, 2017, with him and Klitschko, I'm going to save that fight for another time. I'm going to talk about that when I get to the WBA. So let's talk about him and Carlos Tacome. Well, originally on October the 28th, it stated that it wasn't supposed to be Carlos. It was supposed to be Kubrat Pulev for the IBF mandatory challenger. But Pulev was forced to pull out due to a shoulder injury, so Carlos stepped in as a weight replacement like 12 days into the match, and he got dominated. He might have won a round or so, but yeah, mostly Carlos was just a late replacement, and it was not much of an entertaining fight to talk about, but Joshua went on with him, and that was it. But I think his fight in March the 31st with him and Joseph Parker, which was also for a unified belt, which I'll talk about that fight another time, was pretty decent. But his fight against Alexander Povetkin in September 22nd was actually more of a fight, but somewhat different, because this was the moment when people later realized that Anthony Joshua changed up his boxing style at the time. People had moments that Joshua was not being the boxer he was in 2016 and 2017, and people knew something was up, but people didn't think that he was ever going to lose a fight. People thought he was an unstoppable Adonis. He got Povetkin twice in round 7, and last knockdown, the referee just stopped the fight without count. Like that, like when you see the replay and the slow motion of that knockdown, at the end of the day, guys, Povetkin, yeah, this was more devastating than his loss against Klitschko. Like, that makes sense. Guys, as for the June 1st, 2019 AJ debuting in America with him and Ruiz fight, that's going to be another fight I'm going to save for another time. But for now, the rematch in December the 7th, well, let's just say that fight in Saudi Arabia was somewhat uneventful. Not better than the first fight, but it was clean. But now, guys, let's get to December the 12th, 2020, when crowd attendance were finally coming back. Anthony Joshua finishes off Kubrat Pulev. My throat is so sore right now for all this talking right now, but I'm this close from finishing this podcast right now, so let me just finish it as best I can. So, guys, I'll be honest, guys. The fight wasn't boring, but yet again, considering Pulev was number 1 ranked in the IBF, he won 8 of his fights at the time. He was already back in the ranks. He was past his prime, but he deserved it. Like, there were times that Pulev landed good punches in the fight, but he wasn't landing a lot in each round. It was like what it was. Like, Joshua just came out. Like there was one moment in round 3 when Pulev was counted down, and he was down in round 3 for some reason. Like, it's saying that he was counted and then he was down. I gotta watch the footage. I haven't seen it in a long time. I do remember he was knocked down twice in round 9, but yet again, like, I do feel bad. Like, people do say that the score was a 10-7 in round 3, and that was pretty much every round was dominated for like Joshua. Like, Joshua was just outboxing his opponent. And guys, when you watch the fight in Saudi Arabia he did in 2019, when every time Ruiz tried to attack him, but then Joshua would push his glove back and such, stop him, which was almost the same style as George Foreman in his when Foreman was in his prime in the 70s. When every time people were about to throw a punch, he would touch the guy's gloves, and there was time when people threw a punch, he would block the punches and such, which was something that Ali could handle. But yeah, Joshua's boxing style was a lot more completely different than his style he did with Povetkin and Ruiz in the first fight than his fights he did in 2016 and 2017. And surprisingly, in September the 25th, 2021, he did that with Alexander Usyk. And surprisingly, he did okay, and when I say okay, this was just a moment that seemed like it wasn't going to go places. That fight, I will say though, like Usyk went on a good spree with Joshua in the first fight. Like, he did. Like, he had him in round 1, he had him in round 3, big time. He demolished him in round 7. Demolished him in round 9, 10, 11, and 12. There would have been some other rounds that Usyk would have won, but yeah. I think Anthony Joshua's style he did in the Ruiz 2 and Pulev fight, yeah, I think it was obvious to say that seeing how Usyk, because guys, when you see some of the information of Usyk, I did saw some training videos and stuff in his prime that he was trained. There was some interesting information that seeing Usyk at the time that he was in his prime a lot more for what he was. And even though he's in his mid-30s at this point, until he had a rematch with him in August the 20th the next year, and how that fight became pretty close down to the wire, like, yet again, like, there was time that Usyk had him really big. Like, he demolished him in round 4, again in round 7, round 10, 11, and 12. Those were the dominating rounds. Like, he got him in round 1 and round 5, maybe in round 6, maybe, but I think he did. But yeah, like seeing that, I will say though, Joshua, like, guys, the reason I'm talking about this right now, I am going to talk about these fights in another video, but when you see Joshua, I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that he's going to, I just don't see that. I feel like Anthony Joshua might not have a chance. And guys, even though I'm about to end this podcast right now, I will say this though, if Anthony Joshua can find a new boxing strategy to actually recover from that, because Usyk does have his own weaknesses, but yet again, you also have to find another strategy that you have to prove on. And guys, I just don't know if a third trilogy fight betwixt Usyk and Joshua should be necessary. If Usyk wins again, what are you going to do? Do it again? A 4th rematch? No, I just find that embarrassing, and it's hard for me to watch, so I just don't see the point, and that's about it. And of course, by August the 26th, 2023, Usyk defeating Daniel Dubois by round 9 KO. That will be another fight I'll talk about in the future. And of course, May the 18th, the Undisputed Championship, and that's the end of the story right there. Usyk wins. But guys, here's the information that you have to understand about the CEOs and the presidents, because at this moment, in response, we did have information about the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 when the Federation blocked championship fights involving Russian and Belarusian boxers from fighting. And the reason I'm talking about this is that if we're not going to have a fight betwixt any of those countries, what about Kubrat Pulev? Yes, he's past his prime. He's not a good fighter anymore. And we're also trying to talk about another fight. He's trying to fight for a heavyweight title this year, if they do get that fight underway, which I'll get to that some other time. But it's like, it is hard, like, when you even have to suggest these understatements of knowing the proof about this. But guys, the final thing I have to talk about the IBF is this. Do any of these champions deserve recognition? Well, Hasim Ratman, like, he just got lucked on, and the rematch with him and Lewis, well, Lewis just found a good strategy, and that was it. Chris Bird, does he deserve recognition with this? He was just, no. Like, he had so much controversy in himself, he deserved to get his butt beat by Klitschko. Klitschko deserved the recognition. Fury's win, it was a boring fight, but he deserved it. Charles Martin, no, he was just lucky because his fighter got injured. Anthony Joshua, yeah. Usyk, yeah. And for Lewis, kind of, yeah, depending on the other belts. I think at the end of the day, guys, we just got to understand, even though we only had not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, not 8, but only 9 boxers that have held this title from 1999 to 2024. And believe it or not, guys, that's small. 9 heavyweight boxers have held on to this title for 25 years. From 1999 to 2024 from the Undisputed. And the WBC belt, the WBO belt, and the WBA have a lot more title changes. And I think it's going to be more information I'm going to talk about, because this right here is just the start of the road to the Undisputed Heavyweight Championship. So with that being said, thanks for watching part 1 of the IBF. Thanks for listening to the story of the Undisputed, the road to the Undisputed Heavyweight Championship, part 1. And with that being said, guys, stick around for part 2. And yes, we do have a title match about the Usyk getting his belt vacant. As on June the 1st, we have Daniel Dubois versus that Croatian fighter, Filip Hrgovic. But that's going to be for another time, so I'm not going to talk about that. But yes, Usyk's belt is going to get stripped, but that will be for another time. So thanks for watching this video, but we don't know if that fight will happen. But with that being said, FoxWolf out.